Throughout history, society has created and circulated myths that define how people should act based on their gender, sexuality, and identity. These myths are powerful because they shape cultural expectations, influence behavior, and determine what is considered normal or acceptable. They often serve to uphold systems of power, reinforcing hierarchies that privilege certain identities while marginalizing others. The myth that real men don't cry is one of the most enduring stereotypes about masculinity in contemporary society. This myth, which asserts that men should suppress their emotions and maintain an image of emotional stoicism, has deep historical roots and continues to shape how masculinity is understood and performed today. It reinforces a narrow and harmful definition of what it means to be a man, influencing men's emotional well being, social relationships, and public perceptions of gender. While the myth of real men don't cry ostensibly serves to uphold ideals of strength and self control, it ultimately harms both men and society by promoting emotional repression and fostering a culture of toxic masculinity. Today, we will explore the origins, cultural impact, and continued presence of this myth, examining how it affects men across different racial and class backgrounds and contributes to the ongoing reinforcement of traditional gender norms. The myth of emotional stoicism in men is not new, but has evolved through cultural, social, and historical forces. Historically, the association between masculinity and emotional repression can be traced back to the rise of patriarchal societies in the West, particularly during the 19th and early 20th centuries. According to sociologist Michael Kimmel, the development of modern masculinity was tied to the cult of self reliance, which emphasized the notion that men were supposed to be independent, rational, and unemotional. This cultural ideal was deeply connected to the notions of industrial labor, war, and public life, where emotional expression was seen as a sign of weakness or even failure. In contrast, women were often portrayed as the emotional and nurturing gender, creating a binary opposition that placed emotional stoicism at the heart of the masculine identity. This historical context provided the foundation for the myth that real men don't cry, a concept that still circulates widely today. The cultural impact of this myth is profound, particularly in its influence on men's mental health. Research consistently shows that men are less likely to seek help for emotional distress due to the stigma surrounding vulnerability. A 2018 study published in Psychology of Men and Masculinities found that men who adhere to the traditional gender norms, including the belief that real men don't cry, are more likely to suffer from untreated mental health conditions and engage in self destructive behaviors, such as substance abuse or suicide. The notion that expressing emotion is a weakness has created a toxic environment in which men feel compelled to bottle up their feelings, which can lead to long term psychological harm. In fact, suicide rates for men are consistently higher than for women, particularly in a middle aged and older demographics, a statistic that underscores the lethal consequences of emotional suppression. The myth of real men don't cry also perpetuates the harmful phenomenon of toxic masculinity, which is the rigid enforcement of traditional gender roles that demand men to be dominant, unemotional, and physically strong. Scholars such as Bell Hooks and Raymond Connell argue that toxic masculinity is not only harmful to men, but also to society at large. Hooks, in her book, The Will to Change, explains that the emotional repression of men stems from patriarchal desire to control and maintain gender hierarchies. The myth contributes to the dehumanization of men by insisting that their value lies in their toughness and their ability to avoid displaying vulnerability or emotion. This creates a cycle in which men are discouraged from developing emotional intelligence and empathy, which are essential for healthy relationships, both personal and professional. Race and class also play a significant role in shaping how the myth of real men don't cry is perceived and enforced. For men of color, particularly black men, the stereotype of hypermasculinity compounds the pressure to conform to this myth. In the United States, black men are often portrayed as physically intimidating and emotionally stoic, a stereotype that not only places expectations on them to suppress vulnerability, but also make them targets of racial profiling and systemic violence. In her seminal work on intersectionality, Kimberly Crenshaw argues that race and gender intersect in ways that create unique experiences of oppression for people of color. For black men, the expectation to conform to the real men don't cry myth is not only a cultural norm, but also a survival strategy in society that often associates their emotional expressions with criminality or weakness. Class also influences how men engage with the myth of emotional stoicism. Men from higher socioeconomic backgrounds may have more access to mental health resources and are less likely to feel the pressure to perform a narrow, emotionally repressed masculinity. In contrast, working class men may find it more difficult to break away from traditional gender norms due to economic pressures, limited access to psychological care, and the social expectations to tough it out. Sociologist C.J. Pascoe notes that working class boys often use humor and aggression as ways to bound and assert their masculinity, thus reinforcing the idea that vulnerability and emotional expression are unmanly. This creates a cycle in which emotional expression is viewed as a luxury that only those with privilege can afford, while those from lower classes continue to be confined to emotionally restrictive roles. Despite the pervasive nature of this myth, there has been growing resistance to the idea that real men don't cry. In recent years, there has been a push to redefine masculinity in more inclusive and emotionally healthy ways. Movements like #MeToo and Time's Up have not only challenged toxic masculinity in the context of sexual harassment, but have also encouraged men to examine their own emotional health. Public figures such as actor Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and former professional athlete Michael Phelps have used their platforms to speak out about mental health struggles, signaling a shift in how masculinity can be understood. These shifts in public discourse are crucial as they allow for the creation of alternative models of masculinity, ones that allow men to express vulnerability without fear of social repercussion. The myth of real men don't cry continues to persist in modern culture, primarily because it serves to uphold traditional gender roles that benefit patriarchal structures. This myth has far reaching consequences for men's emotional health, perpetuates toxic masculinity, and harms individuals across different racial and class backgrounds. By discouraging men from expressing their emotions, society limits their emotional development and contributes to harmful stereotypes that affect everyone. To dismantle this myth, it is essential to promote a more inclusive and emotionally aware understanding of masculinity, one that allows men the freedom to express vulnerability and emotional depth. Only through this process of redefinition can we begin to challenge the outdated and harmful notions of what it means to be a real man.